the global headwinds, particularly inflation, the imported inflation, particularly those coming from energy, fuel, and food, contributed to that noticeable slowdown. And to the extent that this is expected to continue in the second half, you would likely to face some challenges indeed in sustaining that growth.
Fortunately, we're running smack into the triple threat that we discussed previously. The three-headed monster: higher inflation, rising interest rates, and the relatively high debt-to-GDP ratio. These are the three sort of direct counterbalances to the major sectors of the economy. We might have to accept the lower end of the official government targets, something closer to 6.5%.
From the nation's capital, all sides, all the time, I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. The big story tonight.
The government remains confident of achieving its 2022 growth targets.
That's despite the economy growing at a slower pace in the second quarter at 7.4%. NEDA Chief Arsenio Balisacan believes the country's growth could have been faster if not for high inflation. He expects these inflationary pressures brought by the Russia-Ukraine tension to persist in the succeeding quarters.
And to the extent that this is expected to continue in the second half, you would likely to face some challenges indeed. We may not grow as fast in the second half as in the first half.
But with the current inflation situation, an economist believes the country's economy may just have to settle for the lower end of government's full-year target of 6.5 to 7.5%. ING-backed senior economist Nicky Mapa told Business World Live that the full-year GDP figure could even fall below targets, or 6.2 to 6.3%, unless inflation slows down.
We might have to accept the lower end of the official government targets, something closer to 6.5%. But with the way that inflation is really kicking higher and with interest rates just about to rise, BSP rather aggressive in its rate hike cycle, this is definitely going to stunt some of that nascent capital formation that we just saw picking up.
Here to talk to us more about the country's growth prospects, we have Finance Secretary Benjamin Diokno. He's joining us live via Zoom. Welcome to The Big Story, Secretary Diokno.
Good evening, Robbie, and good evening, Gretchen.
So, sir, I'll start with what Mr. Mapa's concern, and everybody's concerned, of course. How far or how much is inflation already factored into your confidence of hitting our targets, especially given that, as you keep saying, a lot of these inflationary factors are external to us?
Yeah, I think inflation hit 6.4% last month, but I bet that this has already peaked. Okay, as you know, oil prices has started to go down, so we expect inflation to start to decelerate towards the end of the year. And in fact, we're confident that inflation will be within our target range of 2 to 4% next year. So the impact of that on whether we'll hit our growth target of 6.5 to 7.5%, we're very confident that we will hit at least the lower bound of the target. As RC Balisacan said, all we need to do is grow by 5.2% for the second half, and we'll hit the 6.5% growth rate.
With slower growth, what are your plans on further reducing the debt-to-GDP ratio?
Well, our plan to reduce the debt to GDP ratio is not going to happen within 1 year, right? And in fact, it will taper off to about maybe slightly less than 60% by 2028. the fiscal deficit, or rather the budget deficit to GDP ratio, we expect that to hit 3% by the end of the Marcos Jr. administration.
Okay, and then the third head, as the economists keep saying, the third head of the three-headed monster, interest rates. What are we seeing? Very early on in this administration, Mr. Medalla was quite confident in saying that, look, we'll try to offset by being more predictable, no more than 50 basis points, only an X number this year, maybe a third round by next year. We've breached all of those initial expectations, both in terms of levels. We've hit 75 basis points. We've gone more than 2 rounds already. What are you expecting, and what can people expect when it comes to interest rates?
Well, as you know, for the longest time, we kept interest rate at 2%. Then we started adjusting the rate in May, 25 basis points, in June, 25 basis points. And the surprise one, the latest, is 75 basis points. So we're now at 3.25, right? And so we will have another policy meeting this coming August, this month. And so Professor Medalla, I think, hinted it's either a low 25 basis point to a high of 50 basis point. That's where we are. So we'll probably end the year by around 3.75% interest rate. That is very much within the assumption, and we will continue to grow at our target of 6.5 to 8% for the last 5 years of the Marcos Jr. administration. And so, because we've seen much higher interest rates when we were growing at around 6 to 6.5%.
Okay, and with everything, what do you see happening to our credit rating, or does that even matter that much?
No, I think we're very confident that there will be no downgrade. In fact, it is notable that despite the two-year pandemic, the rating agencies have affirmed our investment grade rating and downgraded maybe 1/3 of the emerging economies and some developed countries. So we're confident that we have presented a medium-term fiscal plan as stated by the president that is credible and doable. So we don't expect any downgrade within the next few years. In fact, we are working for an upgrade. So we will vigorously pursue our economic briefing here and abroad to what we call the road to A. In fact, we are still aspiring to have an A rating down the road.
All right, Secretary, with the recent rate hike of 75 basis points, people have been saying that it actually worked in stifling inflation. What can we expect in terms of the peso-dollar exchange rate? Because I have a lot of friends looking at this. Until the end of the year, hanggang ano po yung pinakamataas, pinakamababa? How high, how low can this go?
Don't bet that the peso will go to 56, okay? Because it won't be there, I think. I'm very confident that it will be back to maybe around the 55 or even lower by the end of the year. As you know, there's usually an influx of overseas Filipino remittances towards the fourth quarter. So things will continue. It has the peso has actually stabilized, and in fact, it's strengthening. And so I bet it will be around 55 by the end of the year.
All right, good news for our Filipinos here in the Philippines. Now, from economy to taxes, we will be continuing our discussion with Secretary Diokno in a bit. But for now, join us in the conversation. Our big question tonight: should government impose taxes on digital services? Share your thoughts on our Facebook and YouTube live stream or post a tweet with the hashtag #TheBigStory. We'll be showing some of your comments later on in the program. We'll pause for a short break. Keep it here on One News.
A key sector in our transformation plans is that of energy. Another fundamental requirement for growth and increased employment will be the availability of cheap, reliable energy. This even comes under the category of ease of doing business. If we are to attract investors, both local and foreign, to set up shop here in the Philippines. At present, our demand for energy far exceeds our reliable supply. We must increase the level of energy production. We must look at every possible option that would be appropriate for the Philippine situation. There is some room to expand our present power supply through existing power sources, but this is only to a very limited extent. We must build new power plants. We must take advantage of all the best technology that is now available, especially in the areas of renewable energy. Our search for new power sources should always be with an eye to improving the mix of the energy supply between traditional and renewable sources. The technology on renewable energy is progressing rapidly, and many of these technologies are appropriate for the Philippines. I believe that it is time also to re-examine our strategy towards building nuclear power plants in the Philippines. We will comply, of course, with the International Atomic Energy Agency regulations for nuclear power plants as they have been strengthened after Fukushima. In the area of nuclear power, there have been new technologies developed that allow smaller-scale modular nuclear plants and other derivations thereof. Once again, PPP.
You're watching the big story here on One News.
Still joining us tonight, we have Finance Secretary Ben Diokno. Good evening, Secretary. All right.
Good evening.
With various concerns on the table, we have inflation, we have debt. How does the government plan to fund the ambitious spending program of President Bongbong Marcos?
Well, there's a combination. Number one, we expect the economy to grow at a much faster rate, and therefore a stronger economy would yield higher tax revenues. So that's number one. Number two, we intend to improve tax administration, especially through digitalization in both the Bureau of Customs and the Bureau of Internal Revenue. And the third, we plan to right-size the government because of digitalization. We probably don't need a lot of manpower, so that's one, and therefore government operations would be more efficient. So a combination of those two, or rather three, will help us reduce our number one, the deficit to GDP ratio. Number two, the debt to GDP ratio, and of course, it will help us improve, or rather increase the per capita income of Filipinos, and therefore we will achieve our vision of having the Philippines to convert to a upper middle income economy. And of course, they find the ultimate, which is to reduce the poverty level to a single digit, 9% by the end of President Marcos Jr.'s term.
Mr. Diokno, we certainly hear the direction for digitalization, and hopefully that makes things much more effective, much more efficient. But what are the non-technology gaps that have to be filled to fill the gaps, to improve the collection on the tax front?
Well, I understand the Bureau of Customs is near its will be able to complete its computerization, but the Bureau of Internal Revenue is also much more advanced. I think you can now pay your income tax using through digital means. And so as long as both the BIR and the Bureau of Customs finish their computerization program, that will be a big boost to revenue collection. I remember the desire to computerize the Bureau of Customs started way back during the Cory administration's term. So right now, the Bureau of Customs has already streamlined and digitalized 92% of its customs processes. And same thing with the Bureau of Internal Revenue.
Mr. Marcos, of course, President Marcos in his State of the Nation address also, of course, really emphasized the role of private sector here in funding big ticket items. Are there any innovations or maybe even new directions in our PPP programs?
That's right. We are planning to in fact, amend some of the provisions in the implementing rules and regulations on the public-private partnership to really attract the private sector to participate in our Build program. As you know, when the Duterte administration started its operations, we don't have a lot of ready to implement projects. Now we are turning over, the Duterte administration has turned over to the Marcos administration a lot of ready to implement projects, shovel-ready projects, which are not only huge or big ticket items, but also very important to link lagging regions to leading regions. And if you combine that list of public-private partnership projects with the revised environment, in fact, the most recent change is in the environment is the Public Service Act. You know, that's a 90-year project. Now, foreign investors can participate in key areas, telecommunication, toll roads, shipping, airports, and they can own them 100%. I think with that combination, with the PPP projects and that new environment, I think we will be attracting a lot of foreign direct investors into the country.
Secretary, with the taxes on digital services, there are people who are concerned that these will not be progressive taxes, specifically when it comes to e-commerce. It might hit the MSMEs. Are there specific sectors that you're targeting, like, for example, streaming services, influencers, excluding some of those where the poor or underprivileged may be hit, or is it encompassing all digital transactions?
Well, the main desire there are two objectives for taxing online services. Number one is it could increase a lot of revenues. So the first objective is revenue generation. The second objective is fairness, right? If you buy from a regular store, you get taxed 12% VAT. But if you buy online, you don't get tax on your purchases. To me, that's unfair, right? I think whether you buy online or you buy from the regular store, you should pay the same tax. And in fact, there is a bias towards maybe those who can afford to buy online, they get to escape the taxation. So that's the second objective, fairness. And the first objective is to generate a lot of revenues.
How do you plan to implement digital taxes? Because there are millions of transactions happening. How will you be monitoring if people are paying?
No, I think you just put it as an additional charge, 12% VAT on online purchases. You just make it as a rule.
Okay. Secretary Ben Diokno, maraming salamat po. And after the break, we'll be speaking with newly appointed OWWA Administrator Arnel Ignacio to discuss his plans for the agency. That when the big story returns, keep it here on One News.
To my fellow Filipinos, ang aking mga minamahal na kababayan, batid ko na hindi madali ang ating pinagdaraanan sa nakaraang higit na 2 taon. Alam ko rin na ang bawat isa sa inyo ay ginagawa ang lahat ng inyong makakaya upang patuloy na harapin ang lahat na pagsubok sa kasalukuyan. I do not intend to diminish the risks and the challenges that we face in this turbulent time in global history. And yet, I see sunlight filtering through these dark clouds. We have assembled the best Filipino minds to help navigate us through this global crisis. We will endure. Let our Filipino spirit ever remain undimmed. I know this in my mind. I know it in my heart. I know it in my very soul. The state of the nation is sound. As for the horror stories that we have heard about the poor quality of educational materials and supplies that are being given to
You're still watching The Big Story here on One News. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has appointed television personality Arnel Ignacio as head of the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or OWWA. Ignacio, who is currently an OWWA Deputy Administrator, will replace Administrator Hans Leo Kakdak. Prior to being named as OWWA Administrator, Ignacio served as Deputy Administrator under former President Rodrigo Duterte in 2018. In 2016, Ignacio was appointed as Assistant Vice President for the Community Relations and Services Department of the Philippine Amusement and Gaming Corporation, or PAGCOR. To find out more about his plans for OWWA, we have with us OWWA Administrator Arnel Ignacio joining us live via Zoom. Good evening, Mr. Ignacio. Welcome to The Big Story.
Oh, good evening, Robbie. Good evening, Gretchen. So, thank you for having me.
Mr. Ignacio, you are not new to OWWA, but now that there is an entire department being built for our OFWs and their concerns, what do you expect to change and to happen?
Yeah, it's not like a new job to do since I've been in OWWA for quite a number of years already. So there's just more things to do. Now, plans to make our programs even more easier to understand is in the pipeline. Alam niyo naman, our OFWs, kailangan matyaga ka lagi magpaliwanag, and the shortest way that you can do it is by simplifying our messaging. But then first, instructions of the Secretary Toots Ople, is to make it a point that the Department of Migrant Workers, and of course OWWA, will be a place of comfort, sanctuary, and a place of safety for our OFWs. Whenever they think of DMW or OWWA, they should always find people who will be more than willing to listen to everything that they have to say, all their problems, and quick response to all their needs. That's the primary instruction of the Secretary.
Sir, what are the most urgent concerns given the tension now with Russia and Ukraine, even Israel and Palestine? Is there, any priority that you're going to be focusing on your first days in office?
Well, for the Russia and the Ukraine crisis, we're very, very happy and glad to tell you that all of the Filipinos, especially those who were trapped in the sea of where the war was going on, all the 28 vessels, all the Filipinos, we were able to take them home. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing story, and OWWA has been at work for over 40 years, and punong-puno na ng experiences sa mga tao dito. So I'm very, very confident that I will be supported by very, very good, very good hands. Naniniwala ako mabuti sa mga kasama ko rito, whom I am very, very thankful for, that they have recommended me to be in this position.
Last question lang po. Any direct orders, any marching orders from President Marcos?
Oh, one very specific order from the president is for us to take care of not only the OFWs, but to extend the help and care to their families, especially their children. So we're very, very excited to be creating programs for children. And this year we'll be launching the OFW Children's Circle. We'll be updating you with the development of this program bago matapos pa itong taon na ito.
I mean, to that point, maybe sundutin ko lang po ng konti. How does OWWA in fact plug in to the education needs of our children? A lot of these children, of course, growing up with at least one parent abroad. How does OWWA feed into the education aspirations of our OFW families?
The existing programs muna ngayon ng OWWA, ito yung mga scholarship programs ng OWWA. So we're taking care of their education for doon sa mga OFWs na may mga naiiwang mga anak. So meron tayong mga scholarship programs like the EDSP, that's Education for Development Scholarship Program. We're supporting them with 60,000 pesos a year. And meron din ODSP, or the OFW Dependent Scholarship Program. These are for the OFWs who are earning $600 or less. So we support them with 20,000 pesos a year. But then we are now creating more out-of-the-box support for the education of their children, gearing towards strengthening of values, arts and culture, sports, para hindi naman sila nagfo-focus lang lagi sa kung ano yung pasalubong, kung ano lang yung kanilang laging material na bagay na they're usually excited to. So ito, yun ang magiging trust natin with regards to the role of OWWA para sa mga anak ng ating mga OFWs. And we're very excited to create these programs.
Okay, maraming salamat po. OWWA Administrator Arnel Ignacio. And that's the big story tonight. For more updates, follow News 5, The Philippine Star, Business World Online. You may also log on to onenews.ph for more in-depth analysis. I'm Robbie Alampay.
The big story is also available via Signal Play app. Make a free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News anytime, anywhere. I'm Gretchen Ho. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.